Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to those in the room. Welcome to those joining us on Twitter. And welcome to those of us joining on the live stream that's being sent around the world. Lots of people are already sending questions in for this morning's debate. So let's get the discussion started. Thank you for joining us to this UNICEF Activate talk, coming to you today from Harvard University. This is the third of a special series of talks that UNICEF is doing, and it's the first time that we're doing this kind of talk leading up to what is our flagship publication called State of the World's Children. We are focusing on innovating for children, innovating for equity, and today specifically focusing on innovating to connect the unconnected. Activate talks bring together a remarkable mix of people. Those here in the room, those joining us on Twitter at hashtag UNICEF Activate, those who are also joining us through the hashtag Digitally Connected, and those who are watching the live stream feed. We've got innovators, we've got experts, we've got thought leaders from the public and private sector, and of course, most important of all, we've got children and young people joining the discussion. All of us showcasing the latest innovations that can deliver progress on major issues confronting children, especially the most vulnerable, wherever they may be in the world. This is a unique discussion for UNICEF, and it's unique in two ways. One, it is the first time ever that we've had these kind of public talks to contribute, crowdsourcing really, our State of the World's Children publication. And two, because 2014 marks the 25th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in the world. This anniversary is an important moment for us to pause, to reflect, and to think about how well the world is delivering on its promise to children. So how are we doing? Today, our focus is on how to harness the incredible minds and the technology and the opportunities of our time to get the job done for and with children, especially those who are still being left behind. How do we go from incremental to exponential change when possible? We've been sharing ideas here at Harvard for the last 2 days. We'll get to a panel talking a little bit more about that, bringing some of those strands together. But today we're going to get started with our keynote speaker. I'd like to invite Dr. Sharad Sapra to the front. Dr. Sapra is going to kick us off. He actually kicked off the first of these discussions, which was in Uganda. Last week, we had one in Indonesia. Today, we're here in Boston at Cambridge. The next talk will be in Beijing a week today. There will be talks in San Francisco, in Armenia, and in other places around the world. Dr. Sapra, Sharad, come on up, is UNICEF's principal advisor on innovation. He's based in Nairobi. He's got more than 30 years experience. That's not meant to embarrass you, it's meant to build you up. He's been our representative in Afghanistan, in Uganda. He started years ago in the area of public health in India. He has tons of experience in innovation as well. Innovation not only as technology, but a way of delivering results for children. And so he's going to be able to look back and bridge to looking forward. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Irina. Morning, everybody, and welcome to the Activate Talks. And let's be activated. Over the last 2 or 3 decades, there has been a lot of progress that has happened in the social sector. We've seen child mortality decline. We've seen more children in school than ever before. We have seen policies and legislations being developed which actually protect children. More people have access to water, and of course, broadband 3G, 2G connectivity is doubling every year, or in some areas, more than doubling. At the same time, we're looking at areas which involve long-term engagement and behavior change, not that much progress has happened, or there are serious gaps. Maternal deaths, still a big challenge. These are not things that can be fixed by just delivery of one service, but actually require a change of behavior and require long-term engagement of the people involved. Enrollment has increased. Attendance has also gone up, but that's not necessarily leading to learning in schools. Area of malnutrition, you still find dent. We have lots of solutions for how do you address the issue of once the malnutrition has happened, but not much work has happened on how do you prevent malnutrition, because that again requires major engagement, major participation of the beneficiaries. Education is no longer translating into employment or livelihoods. We promise to the world that if your child goes into school, the child will have a job and would be a very productive citizen. That is not necessarily happening. And most of the budget of health and education services is actually invested in salaries and buildings, and not necessarily in improving the health and education of people. We are also looking at a phenomenon where there are lots of goals and milestones that have been set, but they are at a level where they hide the inequities. So in a country, you might have, the X country has actually achieved the Millennium Development Goals, but you find that as you go within that country, there are huge areas of disparity and inequities. So it's time for us to revisit the assumptions on which our approaches are based. And the reason why I say revisit, because all the strategies that we decided to deliver goods on or deliver results on were based on a certain set of assumptions. And those assumptions, as a result of the success of those strategies, have changed. There used to be no vaccines. Now there is vaccine. There used to be no schools. Now there are schools. Children were not in schools. Now they are in schools. So success brings its own series of challenges, and especially when you are talking about the rights of the child, and especially when you are looking at the inequities, which force us to look at inequities, the rights conversation, you find that those assumptions that work for many do not actually work for all. And so now the challenge is, how do you focus and reduce those inequities, reduce those disparities? And I believe personally that technology can be a big game changer. Technology can be a big leveling, make the field level, and could actually help leapfrog countries that have been lagging behind to actually be right at the front. And I also believe that the higher the inequities, the easier it is for technologies to actually make a difference, because two things happen. One, you don't have to undo decades of assumptions in those areas, and second, they have no other options except this. If you go into an urban area, they have 20 different options of getting access to information. But if you put technology in an area which is very remote, inequitable, you will find suddenly that that becomes the main option. And therefore, in this room, and all the conversation that we are having can actually be a big game changer, especially for areas of inequity. Some of the things, we put some definitions to start with, because some kind of boundaries are necessary. And so we say, we need to provide access to safe water, right? And then we say, the target is within 4 kilometers access to safe water, because you have to define that. Has anyone ever carried 40 liters of water for 4 kilometers? It's not access, it's drudgery. Pit latrines, a solution that was designed for the army to actually have trench latrines, got translated into temporary latrines, but now has become a development solution for the poor. Pit latrines stink. And so if you take Africa, 15 years back, 20 years back, two things happened. We started promoting sanitary latrines, and the mobile phone companies started promoting mobile phones. Today, people are spending more than half of their money, half of their income, in buying phones and paying for the talk time. No one spends a cent on sanitation. My question is why? And we can give many examples or many arguments of why that is so. For me, the fundamental is people invest in cell phones because they immediately give you a return on investment. They add value to it. Why would someone invest in something that we call human waste and that stinks, right? So we need to reframe those assumptions and say there is a better way of doing it. In a country like Uganda, 35% vacancy rate of teachers, 35% absenteeism rate, which means on any given day, 50% of the students who are in the classroom don't see a teacher. Now, the most valuable thing that a poor person has is time. And they are trusting us and putting the most valuable asset that they have is the time of their kids into the classroom where there is no teacher, there are no textbooks, and where even when the teacher is there, they're not necessarily providing quality education. They are essentially teaching and no learning is happening. I really believe that the place you are born and the family, economic status of your family should not be the determinants of what your future should be. And right now, because of the digital divide or other reasons, what is happening is that these two things are becoming the determinants of the future potential of the child. We can always find one or two examples of kids who grew up in a rural area and then became a great scientist. But for the bulk of the kids, that's not the story. And I talked about this. Do the poor really have to make a choice of putting food on the table and being able to learn and acquire skills? If the purpose of education, if you break down all the shenanigans, is twofold. One is citizenship, and second is livelihoods. Then why do people have to choose between the two? Why can't we have a system whereby all these could be available to everyone? And therefore, there is a need to revisit the way we do business. Wherever there is a divide, there can be a bridge. And so people talk about the digital divide. Let's talk about the digital bridge. How do we connect people who don't have access to internet with those who have access to internet, for example? Why do we have systems? I mean, in this day and age, all our accounting and transparency systems are based on historical account. We get annual reports, we have audits, which all say, this is what happened in the last 5 years, or this is what happened in the last 1 year. In this day and age of instant communication, why is it that our systems cannot be real-time rather than historical account? So that we can actually intervene and prevent that crisis from happening rather than wait 5 years and then get a report by an expert saying, oh, actually you had a crisis 4 years back. And you can do nothing about it because it's already passed. Why do we have to wait for trickle-down effect? That there would be a few elitists who actually get access to something, and then it will trickle down, trickle down, trickle down, so that everyone has to wait. The poorest of the poor and the people living in the remote areas have to actually wait for 15 years, 20 years to actually have the same services that everyone else has. That's not necessary in this day and age. Why is it that we still have training programs for health workers and school teachers once a year or once every 2-3 years, whereas in this day and age of connected technology, and Guru is the one who actually focuses on teachers, we can have a continuous learning happening, right? So why are people not a part of the solution? Why is it that they are just recipients? Why is it that they are who else is more interested in making things happen for them or work for them than the people who benefit from that? Why are they not the center of development of these solutions or participation and just mere recipients? And that's where the role of innovation comes in. We need to move away from what is world to what can be world. It's possible. We all have to become dreamers. The biggest constraints that we have in our imagination is we ourselves. We are our biggest censor boards. Using words like in a real world, or words like in reality, let's be reasonable. You know what? It's time that each one of us is extremely unreasonable. Because being reasonable is not going to deliver what we want to achieve. Okay? In any case, if you add UN in front of reasonable, it becomes unreasonable. So we need to be unreasonable. We need to ask for ourselves, not what I have, but really what I can achieve. And that is when we start stretching those boundaries of what we think is possible, what we think is real. We start stretching those boundaries, we actually innovate. We actually achieve something that's way, way bigger than we all think what we have. I mean, we can send an astronaut to the moon and bring that person back alive. We can't deliver medicines and textbooks to schools. I mean, come on, give me a break. How do we take the big brains and the research of all these prestigious institutions, all these heavily funded labs in the world, all the research centers, and how can we get that to work for those who are living in remote communities, who are living under inequity? It's possible. It can be done. And why can't we take, because I really believe that every problem that we face today, someone has found a solution. We just haven't found that person. And all we need to do is actually find those people, because being illiterate is not being unintelligent. Intelligence and education, I don't see much relationship there. However, every poor person has found a way to deal with the problems or the challenges they are facing. How can we identify those challenges? How can being digitally connected help us identify those solutions, put some science behind it, put some resources behind it, and take it to scale so that it benefits many more who are there? It must be done. It can be done, and it must be done. We're talking about MIT has open university. Anyone can go and look at the curriculum and attend classes and everything. So you've got open universities all over the place, right? But only 17% of the kids in developing countries, that's a lousy word, but that's a word that many people understand. Only 17% go to universities. What happens to the broader base? Why is it that we cannot start with open primary? If there are no teachers, there are millions of retired teachers all over the world. How can we connect them to that school where there is no teacher, where there is no textbook? How can we connect them and make sure that that kid's potential to become someone great is not limited just because there is no teacher in that particular school? Digitally connected can make that happen. We just need to invest some time and energy in these solutions. If we can, call it too big to fail, and we put billions and billions of dollars to bring countries out of economic crisis, you know what? 3 billion people are too big to fail. It is not acceptable that we do not pool resources and our energies to actually make sure that those 3 billion, the half of the world's population that's living in remote areas, that's living in poverty, that does not have access to all the fancy things that you and I are carrying around our body, that they can have access to that and that they don't fail. So this is what Activate Talks is about. This is why we are all here. And that is to how to find ways and come together and start initiatives that actually provide scalable solutions to the simplest of the world's problems, which are very solvable with digitally connected technology. I'm told I have 5 minutes. Thank you. And there are some questions that I leave behind here for you. The relationship between being connected, innovative potential, and its impact on development. In the US, 25%, I was reading the other day, 25% of the people don't have internet at home. So just being digitally, a 3G or a broadband being available does not necessarily mean that people will have access to it or people will use it. And that's a challenge that we need to figure out different models, business models, on how that can be done. The second question is, should internet access be a fundamental right? My point is that internet access is a subset of access to information. It's one tool. So we need to start looking at how do you provide access to information, and maybe this group could focus on internet access, but not forgetting that it's just one tool. The key critical thing is how do you provide access to information to people. And what are the biggest blockages? And these blockages, everything can be a problem. And for me, every problem is an opportunity for us to do something about it. So if there is a blockage, there is a way that we can open it. So if we can open hard blockages, why the heck can't we open blockages in basic logistics and delivery systems? And so what I would do is leave you all with some of these thoughts, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharad, for getting us started. I think I can fairly say that Sharad is one of UNICEF's unreasonable dreamers, and we're lucky to have him. You've set up a provocative context with some key questions that some of us have actually been discussing for the last couple of days, thanks to Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society and UNICEF that have been co-hosting a symposium called Digitally Connected. This is part of that symposium. Those of you who have been following on hashtag digitally connected and hashtag UNICEF Activate have also been part of that so far. I see that some of you are already sending questions. We'll get to your questions, I promise you. We have a fantastic panel, a global panel of 4 people. And Sharad will come back at the end when we get to our question and answer session. But first, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Bruce Bakey, to get us started on this other part of our discussion. Bruce is Invenio's CEO. He's also the founder of Green Wi-Fi. When we talk about disconnected, we think about technology. But it's not only about technology. And Bruce's team has been involved in picking up where others have failed. He's got great experience and insight from various parts of the world in how and where to start, and when it comes to sustainable computing and engagement with youth, technology, and the technology they work with. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. What I'd like to share with you is a little bit about what Invenio is and what we do. Our mission for the last 8 years has been connecting the unconnected. And our mission has been providing connectivity or internet access in rural communities, providing sustainable computing, but in other terms, solar-powered computing labs in schools, healthcare clinics, and refugee camps. And third, building local capacity that can support those systems in the long term when we've gone back to our other projects are back here to the US. Interesting, my background, and people ask, how did I get started in this? And it's a kind of a long story. You know, my background is in engineering. I started in the energy side of engineering, then moved into the computer industry and spent the last 27 years doing that. But about 8 years ago, I was working for Sun Microsystems. My job was designing energy efficient data centers. And at that time, of course, internet data centers were kind of the rage, and telecoms were jumping into that business. So my job was to figure out how to help AT&T save money with their data centers. However, the CEO of the Rwandan phone company came to California. We just had launched a set of new eco servers, and we're trying to, and his biggest cost was energy running his telecom. So typical business meeting, but he got up and gave this passionate talk about his vision of how he's trying to drive internet access to the universities, to the secondary schools in Rwanda. And then, of course, I asked the naive question, well, what about the primary schools? And his answer was, well, in Rwanda, the majority of the primary schools don't have electricity. Without electricity, they can't have a network. With a network, they just have what they have. I can't help them. And so somewhere in me, the engineer came out and said, wait a minute, I've been training my whole life for this. I can solve this problem. And so I jumped in, developed this solar-powered Wi-Fi thing, and thought, great, here's an engineer's view. I've solved the problem, world. Schools can have internet access. Well, that was a little bit naive, of course, but that's been my driving passion for the last 8 years, is how do I get more internet connectivity and the right type of computing in schools in the developing world. So of course, I developed this thing, went to Rwanda, said, here it is, and of course, I find out it's just one piece of the puzzle. Great, here's now, we have internet access, but Mr. Bakey, our computers aren't working, help us there. Our teachers aren't trained, now what can we do? So, the principles that I've learned in the last 8 years in trying to drive my passion and goal of getting internet connectivity to primary schools is really, there's 5 lessons I've learned to make these projects successful. Number 1, we have to have the appropriate and affordable hardware, meaning computer equipment, ICT equipment that's meant to work in those harsh environments, that uses low energy and can be easily powered. Second, that it's appropriate content and applications for that local culture and language. Third, training. The proper teacher training, training administrators, and people to support those systems locally. And I'm going to digress just for a second. And the typical phone calls that I get, this is a true one that happened. I got a call from a gentleman out of Washington, D.C. He went out and gathered all these corporate laptops and said, I'm going to give laptops to schools in Haiti, and gathered up all these laptops, put all this open source software on it, took them to Haiti, gave them to schools, went back 6 months later, and they weren't using them. And, well, why? Well, and he called and he said, well, we trained them. I sent 3 graduate students from Virginia Tech to go train teachers. But grad students in computer science aren't the right people to train teachers, and a half a day is not enough time. And, by the way, in Haiti, the culture is that if you can walk into a business and show that you know how to use Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Office, you're going to get a job. Anything else, you're not going to. So those people weren't using it because it's the wrong platform. So the last lesson, of course, learned to make these solutions work is long-term support of these. So as I mentioned, Invinio is now installed with us and our partners over 2,000 solar-powered computer labs in Africa, about 60 in Haiti, and we did that through local partners. And some of the photography that you're seeing here is where we have trained youth to be that local resource and support arm for us when we're not there. And so one of our goals has been, how can we educate, enable, and support entrepreneurs in this endeavor and be our local support arm? And so I'm proud to say that we've trained over 126 small companies, 1 to 6 persons, in 20 countries to be that support arm. So a lot of people say, Bruce, how can Invenio, who only has 12 employees, actually do all this work that we've been doing? Well, we do it because of all of these 126 countries, companies that we have partnered with across these 20 countries. And in Haiti, we actually had a really good program where we actually recruited and trained 60 youth, ages 18 to 22, to be local entrepreneurs that can go in and install wireless connectivity to get schools connected, support those computers, and do the training. Once again, it was a huge learning experience for me. You know, we went down and we trained them how to do the wireless, how to do sustainable computing, but guess what? They didn't know how to run a business. They didn't know how to do accounting. They didn't know how to keep inventory. And so then we had to add, well, guess what? We needed to hire somebody that has a entrepreneurial background that could actually train these young people how to be entrepreneurs and train that business. Because one of our goals also is that they can make a living in the rural area doing this type of work. So once again, my passion is getting schools connected to the internet, making sure that the equipment, the training, the long-term support is there so that when I go back, not in 6 months, but go back in 6 years, that systems are still up and operational. And I'm proud to say from an Invenio standpoint, you know, we have such labs, for example, in northern Uganda that have been up and running over 7 years because of using this model and these lessons that have been learned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Jason at Planet U, we're about to get to the next speaker who will answer your question about what happens to those who are offline, who are unconnected, and how does this whole discussion about innovations relate to them. For the answer to that, I'm going to invite our second speaker, Paulo Rogério Nunes from the Instituto Media Étnica of Brazil, to come and join me. Come on up, Paulo.
Good morning, everyone.
Paulo and his team provide low-tech solutions. In fact, they provide no-tech solutions to some of the challenges that we've been talking about this morning. I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. As you may know, internet has changed our life. Nowadays, everybody seems to be connected. The technology changed the way we use science. Of course, our communication nowadays is totally different than years ago. And it seems that everybody's really connected on Facebook, Twitter. Everybody's like in a global digital village, right? But in fact, it's a hype. If you go to look to the data, you can see in the so-called developing world, about only 30% of people are really connected on the internet, which is a really bad news, right? These people are really unconnected with these possibilities that the internet made possible. Nowadays you can release a book very easily. You can release a music. You can access to the library from all of the world. All kind of possibilities that now lots of communities in the world cannot access. So the question is, how can we really try to change the situation? We had been discussing this topic for the couple of days here. How can we change this? How can we have really make possible to people to connect on the internet? I'm from Brazil. Brazil is a country very unequal, and you have lots of problems in terms of connectivity as well. It's a huge country, and you have lots of marginalized communities that have no access to infrastructure and of course, computers and internet as well. In 2012, I was a Fulbright fellow, a Humphrey fellow here in the United States, and then I spent some time at the University of Maryland, and happens to stay here and in Cambridge, doing my professional affiliation at the Center for Civic Media at MIT, in the Center for Civic Media, which is a center specialized in new technologies for the development. people from MIT, right? So I met lots of geeks and hackers and researchers doing lots of great things. And then they spoke to me about the technology that was so amazing to learn. It's called Vojo. Vojo is a technology that allows people to have a blog, to post a blog without have internet, without have a computer, without have a tablet or a smartphone. At this point, you should be asking, Paulo, what kind of magic is this? Are you crazy? No, it's possible. So essentially, it's a mobile blog platform that you can update from virtually any kind of device, like a basic cell phone, or even a public telephone, or a landline. So you have different kind of ways. One is audio mode, so you can upload an audio file, just you dial a number, and then in this number you just leave a message or a report, and then automatically it goes to a server, and then it's online. So then you can, people can, journalists can access this content. We can share on Facebook and Twitter, those who are connected. So we can also send a MMS message with a photo, and then this photo can go online as well. Or you can send a video MMS, and also it can go online in text, SMS text as well. So my point is, it's possible to give voice to people who are disconnected with low-cost solutions. And then when I found this technology, I was so impressed, and I came back to Brazil. The first thing I did when I came back to Brazil, I live in the northeast of Brazil, in Salvador, Bahia, which is a city that has lots of African people, African descendants. So when I came back to Brazil, I implemented this technology with some people in some communities, and they are so amazing. So basically, we started training people to send reports about their reality, about what was going on in the community. And then these RSS, the feed, was sent to traditional journalists that could now access what they had to say, that before it was not possible to promote. I'm going to show you some pictures. This is the island in Salvador that we have been working. As you can see, it's area, the rural area, and they don't have internet connectivity there. So these are all the kids. And then this picture, they are listen to the record message that they just sent the report. And then here, they are covering a conference in the city. You see, this is a basic cell phone. It's not a smartphone, not a fancy phone. It's just a basic cell phone. And they are covering, interview this guy, a community leader as well. And then automatically, this content goes to the internet. So this is a really interesting process that the kids are now empowered to talk about their reality, even though they don't have internet access, computers, laptops, or tablets. So it was the first day of the event, the workshop. And then I will say some few words about Vojo and about the way we can use low-tech tools to let people be connected. So Vojo is an open source technology. So as I said, I learned this technology, I came back to Brazil, and I translated to Portuguese and adapted to our reality. We are a community, a very vibrant community of developers, journalists, and people who are engaged in this process of make Vojo possible everywhere in the world. So I really highly recommend you to go to the website www.vojo.co, and then we learn about this technology and maybe come back to your country and implement it as well, this process there, because I guess it's really helpful everywhere in the world, in places when you don't have internet or connectivity. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paulo. Interesting to hear how people with no voice can also have a voice. That's a little bit the segue into the subject that the next speaker is going to be talking about. I'd like to introduce a remarkable young woman, Regina Aguirre, who is she's a social entrepreneur. She was a finalist in the African Digital Woman of the Year competition. She really is remarkable. She works on, through Soronco Solutions, she tries to work on things that use basic mass technology to drive human potential and tech needs for girls in Ghana. She also does a particular kind of work for Ghanaian women, girls, and others who are offline unconnected. That's one kind of disconnected. But there's another kind of disconnected group, and that's the work that she's going to be talking to us about today, and it's disconnected children with disabilities. Disconnected once, disconnected twice, but tell us how you're helping. Regina, over to you.
Hi, so my name is Regina Jare, and I run Sunku Solutions. Sunku Solutions is a social enterprise that's about using technology to drive human potential. And we're really about connecting the unconnected because we believe that no child should be left behind. So we have a program called Growing STEMs, where we take science and technology to the rural communities. We get the kids to do science and tech games. They use local resources to fix local problems. And then we convert those skills into businesses, products, and services through an apprenticeship program. So we're setting up model villages in 10 communities in Ghana. Then we work with young girls. And in this program, we work with girls from the slum who are being forced into early marriages. What we do is that we give these girls coding skills. So we teach these girls how to code. So we give them skills that gives them economic empowerment, allows them to lead and innovate. And we do this through a mentorship program. So we connect them with other young women who are either computer scientists or engineers. And so that's our Tech Needs Girls program. And we do a lot of hardware. So this is Arduino, which is always a fun thing. Now, the thing I'm going to talk to you about is the disabled. Growing up, I never saw any disabled people, apart from the people that I saw on the street. So I thought there are probably like just a few disabled people. 1 billion of the world's population, or 15% of the world's population, are disabled. And we were asked to take our program to deaf children. And I was like, okay, so I'm thinking there are going to be like 20 deaf girls, because I've been everywhere, and I don't know a single deaf person. So I go to the State School of the Deaf, and there are literally hundreds of deaf children. There are 93 million deaf children, and 80% of them live in developing countries, and they are the poorest of the poor. There was a story that was covered about the spirit child, where when a child is born with disability in northern Ghana, the child is killed because they believe that the child is possessed with evil spirits. This is the dilemma that the disabled face in Ghana, where they are totally cut out from the community or the society. They have no access to proper health care because there are no interpreters or people or wheelchair ramps or people that help the blind. So with our work with the deaf, we realized that we had to find a way to sort of get them connected, to sort of bridge that gap. And what we started to do is we're developing a mobile app that converts text to sign language. And we're hoping to scale it to convert voice to sign language. Because these deaf children have no way of reaching out to their family, to the people around them. Most of the girls, their highest aspiration was to be hairdressers. And for the boys was to drive the public transport. Forget lawyer, doctor, that was not even something that they think about. And they would leave school, they would just have basic education. So we started running out our pilot, which is the signing monkey. And what we did is that the girls click, and then there's an animated monkey that signs Ghanaian Sign Language. And we saw that the girls were so excited, they were so interested. And we realized that there's something called the deaf culture. So we thought, why don't we include the children as we're building the app? So as we're teaching them digital skills, they're also helping us to build this app. We ran several pilots for the children, and we realized that this was going to be really great because now they could get a way to connect. We've also decided to talk to the Ghana National Association of the Deaf, and they were so excited about the project. There's another problem. The government, we're trying to reach out to them to sort of pay attention because nobody's talking about the disabled. So it's like it's a problem that's hush-hush. There's a Disability Act which says that employees must hire disabled people, but that's not what's happening. Disabled people are not able to get jobs, they're not able to get economic empowerment, and they end up living in very poor situations. We're hoping that our application can change that. We're hoping that we can do a lot of wonderful things. There's a blind man in Ghana who is a newscaster. He's an amazing man who uses technology to do so many wonderful things. He's on Facebook, he's on Twitter, he's on Instagram. And today I'm going to play a video and show you his story of how he uses technology to connect, how he uses technology to tell the news, and how he's inspiring a lot of the disabled in Ghana.
Hello, good afternoon, and warmly welcome to Week in Focus. My name is Paul Anomakodia. Coming up in this hour, National Health Insurance capitation reaches 3 more regions in an attempt by the authority to roll it out nationwide. Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo makes a comeback to contest NPP's presidential election. In business, domestic airline sector records 14% increase in passenger numbers in 2013. And in international news, pro-Russian troops take over Ukrainian naval headquarters in Crimea. And now the details of their stories. The University of Ghana on Monday extended the time limit given to commercial drivers who ply the campus from 15 to 20 minutes. However, the new time frame has not allayed the concerns of drivers. ETV's Deborah Smalley-Lomote reports. After a turbulent piloting of the capitation program in the Ashanti region, the National Health Insurance Authority has announced the extension of the project nationwide. But ahead of the implementation, ETV News examines the feasibility of the much criticized exercise, which has been fraught with lots of setbacks. In sport.
So to conclude, we're hoping that our application will go out there. There's an application called Hand Talk that is done in Brazil, which converts Portuguese to Libras, and you can use it for text, for photography, for voice. We're hoping that now the deaf can go online, copy and paste a content on the web, and then have it translated into sign language. We're hoping that our application would scale to all the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and we're hoping that finally the disabled will also be able to get connected. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Regina. Our last speaker on this panel is from the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU. Susan Shore is the head of the Special Initiatives Division. The division does a whole range of things, digital inclusion, digital literacy, digital skills. They look at innovations to empower young people through physical connectivity and skills for a breadth of things. But most particularly, since today we're talking about innovating for connecting the unconnected, most particularly, the technology is being used for one major challenge that young people face around the world today: unemployment. Susan.
Good morning, everybody. And before we start, I would just like to give a big warm thanks to UNICEF and to the Berkman Center for inviting ITU to be part of these fascinating discussions that we've been having over the past 3 days. I'd like to talk about some of the work that we do to promote digital inclusion and see how that we can use some digital solutions that we have identified to solve the #1 youth problem, which is unemployment. And a problem that faces youth today is going to face the children of today tomorrow. So this is an issue that is relevant both to children and to young people. One of the projects that we have worked on in ITU has been a women's digital literacy training program. We teamed up with an NGO called telecenter.org Foundation, and we successfully trained 1 million women at the bottom of the development pyramid to be digitally literate. And that has informed some of our decision making on what we'd like to do in terms of youth. Another thing that we have done, which I mentioned yesterday, is we have a campaign to try to encourage more girls and young women to become ICT creators and to take up tech jobs. So I'd kind of like to use some of the experiences that we've developed from our digital literacy campaign and our International Girls in ICT campaign to identify some of the digital solutions that we can use to tackle youth unemployment. So what I'd like to start off by saying is I'd like to talk about ICT jobs. What I'd like to say is that in the face of staggering global youth unemployment, the ILO, the International Labor Organization, estimates that there are 73 million young people around the world who are unemployed, and added to that is another 621 million who they consider NEET, not in education, employment, or training. Those are staggering numbers. Now, while we can't compete with those numbers, there's a good news story, which is at the same time that people are looking for jobs, the tech industry, the ICT industry, is saying that they cannot find people with the right technical skills, the computing skills and the engineering skills that are needed to do the jobs that will help create the technology that is revolutionizing society today. So let's look at some of those numbers. Neelie Kroes, the European Commissioner for the Digital Agenda, who's a big supporter of our Girls in ICT Day activities, conducted a study last year called Women Active in the ICT Sector to find what are the numbers of jobs that will go unfulfilled in Europe. And she predicts 900,000 ICT jobs will go unfilled in Europe by next year. We have a very similar story here in the United States. The National Center for Women and Information Technology, which is located at the University of Colorado, Boulder, predicts that there will be 1.2 million IT jobs in the US by 2022. Now, of that, they predict 39% will be filled by current computer science graduates, but it means that some 732,000 jobs in the US will go unfilled. Unfortunately, we don't have the same kind of numbers. Those studies have not been done in developing countries. But what we do know is that ICT is growing rapidly in developing countries. And here's a slide of growth of mobile broadband. Mobile broadband has grown in developing countries. It has doubled in developing countries in the last 2 years alone. Since the smartphone or the iPhone was introduced in 2007, there's been 40% annual mobile broadband growth. And the number of mobile broadband subscriptions in developing countries now outnumbers those in developed countries. So what does this mean about jobs? Well, where the subscribers are growing, the networks are growing. And where the networks are growing, we're going to need people with the right technical skills to fill those jobs. So we can predict that around the world, there are millions of ICT jobs that will go unfilled. In addition, the second trend that I wanted to talk about is the need for digital skills for any job. And that's because ICTs have transformed virtually every market segment today, from traditional segments like farming and health, and it has created a whole new set of ICT market segments that did not exist even a few years ago. So if we go back and look at our ICT job numbers, let's look at a market segment that did not exist before 2007 when the smartphone was introduced, apps-related ICT jobs. So there are 530,000 apps-related jobs that have been created in Europe by 2013, and 752,000 app-related jobs in 2013. So we see increasingly there's a need for digital skills, whether young people will be working in traditional market segments or in these new ICT-fueled market segments. And we have to train young people to have these digital literacy skills. And we also have to train entrepreneurs like Regina to have these skills, because there's a whole new set of digital entrepreneurs, and we've had many of them here at our digitally connected discussions over the last couple of days. In this way, we can see that increasingly, whether we're talking about tech specialists or we're talking about people in any kind of job today, they can become ICT creators. And that's the goal of the Girls in ICT Day campaign that we lead. What I wanted to show here is that what's happening in these Girls in ICT Day activities, they're events that are organized around the world to invite girls to come in and get them excited about a future in the ICT sector. When we first started this and we rolled these out a couple years ago, they were more like information sessions. Young girls would come into a room like this, there would be role models, women role models, and we would try to convince them that they should have such a career. But now we're actually engaging in maker activities with these girls. And this happens to be a 3D trophy that was created by the organizers in Guatemala and delivered last week on April 24th. They held a competition for tech development. A visually impaired young woman won that contest, and they printed out on the 3D printer the trophy that was given to those girls. So everything was using ICTs. And the big message that I wanted to convey here is, while we've been talking about the importance of youth becoming creators of ICTs, in particular, we want to make sure that young girls and women become those creators of ICTs, because right now we have a very homogenous group of people that are creating the technology that has revolutionized our lives. And it would be great to move to a world where we had a more heterogeneous group of tech creators. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that there's also an explosion of online resources to give people the digital literacy skills that they need and a whole new collaborative way of working to convey these skills. So this is a picture of some of the young people that participated in our Global Youth Summit in Costa Rica last year, engaging in hands-on activities. This is our hackathon at the Global Youth Summit, again, giving people hands-on experiences. This was from Girls in ICT event in the UK last week. Little girls being encouraged to work collaboratively to build robots. And we also know that there are lots and lots of online resources. We've talked about some of those: open education resources, flipped classrooms, and MOOCs. And while we don't know whether some new disruptive educational technology like a MOOC will become effective or will continue to exist as they are in years to come, what we do know is that if these online learning opportunities are coupled with face-to-face learning opportunities, such as tech meetups, they are far more successful. So if we take these three trends all together, what does this tell us of what kind of strategies we could be implementing to promote youth employment? There are a number of things that we could do. A lot of the initiatives that are happening today, they're being done by NGOs, they're being done by foundations or the private sector, they're being done by international organizations like UNICEF and ITU. It would be great to see those scaled up by government stakeholders themselves. A second thing that we can do is we can embrace digital literacy training as part of all school curriculum and change the kind of training that we do to support collaborative learning environments. And finally, we can invest, governments can invest in a lot of these new spaces that right now, again, are just being done by the private sector, NGOs, and foundations, so they can actually be funding working spaces, common working spaces where entrepreneurs can work, hackathons, and mobile app competitions. And in this way, we can help build the digital skills that all young people are going to need to have a job in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to invite the speakers to come up. I'm going to ask you to be patient with us for just a moment as we do a little bit of housekeeping, house cleaning, house managing, something about the house anyway. And please prepare your questions. I've been following the Twitter feed. Come on up, panel. The Vojo, Soronko, and Invinio experiences have clearly inspired a lot of people. There are a lot of people talking about that on the hashtag UNICEF Activate feed. And Sharad's earlier comment about we can land a man on the moon and come back safely, we should be able to reach all children everywhere, has also resonated with a lot of people. At Nick Leslie, at Jane Burns, thank you for retweeting that. Great. Over the past few days, this talk is a bit of a culmination, thanks, of a discussion that's been going on here at the Harvard Law School over the past 3 days. And we're going to pick up where we left off because this presentation really brings several strands of what we've been talking about together. So I'm going to open it up. I know that at Jane Burns had a question about real-time monitoring. If there's a if there's a division, excuse me, if there is a divide, there can be a bridge in this day and age. Why don't we have real-time monitoring and feedback? I think that that's actually something that is being done, certainly at UNICEF and by some others. I'd really encourage people who are joining us via Twitter to also share some of your experiences. I think one of the really rich things of our days of discussion has been hearing about everybody's projects, what they've done. Bruce was particularly gracious in sharing not only the successes of what he's done, but also some of the failures or what they've learned and what they've had to add on in extending beyond the technology, some of the programs, some of the policies to really round out and make a successful project. So I'm going to turn it over to the room first while I wait for questions from Twitter and see if there's anybody who would like to address anyone on the panel. Over to the friends here. While you're thinking of your questions, oh, no, there's one right here. Can you get a mic in the front?
I guess this is a question for Bruce. I was talking last winter with a gentleman who helped, I guess, grow a school in Senegal. And USAID provided all kinds of computers. And I think space is very limited in this one school. And an entire room had been given over. People hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
An entire room had been given over to computers, and they were just sitting gathering dust, and the room was needed for classroom instruction. And the aid money wasn't providing what you're talking about. It wasn't providing for tech support or maintenance, and then there were all the power outages. And so he developed just a kind of whiteboard, like a blackboard mobile with wheels, with plastic piping and employing some mobile technology, but very little. And I'm wondering if there's some connection between government-funded aid work and the kind of work you're doing that sustains both training and support, and what do people do about energy and recharging batteries and that sort of thing?
Well, I think the challenge there is, we've got caught up in this philosophy, if we build it, they will come. And I think that's been the real challenge of aid agencies as well as, well-meaning foundations and donors. Oh, we'll put this beautiful computer lab in a school and won't that change their lives? Well, if there isn't proper teacher training, if there isn't training for the administration on how that integrates into curriculum and how teachers can effectively use it, if there isn't curriculum in their native language and content in their native language, those are key factors whether that's going to succeed or not. And, getting to your point, was it the appropriate technology for what that school needed? So, those are all tough questions, but if they're not being asked and if they're not being funded on proper teacher training, on the appropriate content and applications for that environment, then I can build the most beautiful computer lab in the world, it's not going to be used.
But what about, so that other disconnection is between government aid. How do we solve that disconnection between the bureaucrats, the funders, in large cities in the developed world, and what's happening on the ground?
Well, now, I'm an engineer, so, now you're getting into policy and the human side of things, but the reality there is, there's been enough failures, and we need to start pointing those out, that model is not working. Here's a different model, here's a better model on how we're going to really make these type of environments successful, and showing how proper funding can be used to make that happen. And it's an education process of those policymakers, of those government officials. It's the hard human side of it, to be truthful. As an engineer, I can put blinders on, great, I can put the best technology there, but, what I've learned over the last 8 years is, that's only 8% of the solution.
Great. Thank you very much for your question. In fact, it's prompted a couple of other people on the panel to want to answer. Sharad?
Yeah, actually, one of the things we've been working on and are very close to success is getting all these organizations, 8 organizations, to agree on principles of how we work. Because if you start focusing on technology agreements, that really don't last. But if you agree on principles, that it has to be open source, that it has to be something that's user-centered, it's designed, the solution is designed with the people. And then the most difficult part, that the idea is bigger than the organization, which essentially means if you have a great idea, it belongs to everyone. How do you do it? And we've been able to do that with World Bank, USAID, DFID. All these organizations are actually almost there, including some large private sector companies, to sign off on these principles. And what we are doing is increasingly in countries, when we are talking about these things, we're inviting all the partners. Because public good has to be for everyone. There is absolutely doesn't make any reason that every organization tries to figure out its own solution as if nothing exists. Yeah? And so the idea is, how do you join rather than create in all cases? And I think it's slow, but we're getting there.
Thanks. Sometimes we don't know what we know, and the sharing is really critical. Susan wanted to add to this debate, and then we'll go on to the next question.
So at ITU, we also have an initiative called Connect to School, Connect to Community. And so one of the models that we were using there is to not just have the schools and the computers in the classroom for the school children alone, but to leverage those as community centers, which could be providing the same kind of services to the community at large. So the community is then invested in those. They can be the kind of centers that I was talking about that we need for digital literacy training and all sorts of other training as well. So that is one other possible model that we could look at.
I'm going to go to a question from Twitter. I see a few hands up in the room. Let me just address this question to Regina, because it's consistent. It touches on what we're talking about right now. And the question is, do you consider the work of Soronko to be replicable? If so, where? And have you actually been in touch with other people in other contexts, whether it's in other places in Ghana or beyond, with your model?
Yes. We actually hope that it will be replicable, because we're hoping to start something that will grow from just Ghana to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa and also in other emerging economies. We have started talking to some people in Nigeria and Cameroon, and we're looking at because one of the things that we do is we build a lot of local content. Like Bruce said, local content is key. You can't just sort of take content that is from somewhere without any local relevance or local context and think it will work. So we're really hoping that people will take our model and run with it. Yes.
Fantastic. We'll go back to the room for another question here in front.
Lovely. My name is Dorothea Kleine from Royal Holloway ICT4D Centre. We did a literature review looking at children, ICT and development, and it had an explicit focus on equity. And equity is one of these things that we can all agree on, who's against equity? Lots of the respondents were very pro the idea that we would be particularly focusing on the poor and more marginalized children in particular. There was huge disagreement amongst the participants in our interviews as to how one might fund that, and whether it should be the responsibility of government, or whether it should be donor funding, or whether there could be bottom of the pyramid business models, etc. And I was just wondering what the views of the panel were on this, given that we're all in favor of equity, how we're going to fund a focus on the poor and more marginalized.
Sharad, do you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, it's not an either-or situation. It's not that this model is the one that applies globally. So different situations will require different things. Our experience has been that in some cases it could be a price-based model. In some cases, we've been able to connect what started as youth centers into becoming internet centers where part of the services are free, the learning part, but the use part in terms of if you want to send an email to someone, if you want to watch a football match, if you want to do something of your own, then there is a small fee, or you can have a library membership kind of thing. In some cases, we've converted it into a micro enterprise with the help of funding from some banks who actually converted it into a cash transfer location. So while phone charging was happening and people can charge money from that, financial transactions were happening. There were 2 or 3 units that were available for public good and for public use. We also are working on, and we have the prototypes now of merging the public call booth with an Android platform. Android because that's what we used. I mean, it could be any platform. But that thing also has a dual purpose where if you have SIM cards which are the size of visiting card, and you may not have a phone or anything, you plug that card. If you have money, you can do cash transfers, you can make phone calls and all the commercial activities. If you don't have money, you still have access as an individual with your credentials to a whole series of public good operations. So the different models, you cannot say that this is the one that works for everything and should be used.
So it's clear who benefits and who doesn't. If the money's not there, it's just where does the money come from? Anyone else on the panel want to handle that one? Please, Regina.
So one of the ways that we do it is we have a for-profit also. So apart from just sort of looking for funding, we sort of are able to like raise our own funds. So we build software for small and medium-scale enterprises, and we use that money. But at a point in time, we need to scale. So we're trying to talk to the government to take our curricula and then sort of scale it up to the public schools. I feel like sometimes the best way is to identify social entrepreneurs who are actually doing stuff and then fund those projects, as opposed to the way that you sort of put out a call for applications and people just sort of send out a proposal that fits that and then don't really do what they say they're going to do. So I think some of the ways is to actually find individuals who have already started, who have already piloted, who have sort of sustainable models that make sense, and then fund them to continue.
Thank you. We've got a question at the back. Sonia Livingstone.
Hello, I'm Sonia Livingstone from LSE and EU Kids Online. I have 2 kind of related questions about the scope of the projects that you've been describing, and I know they're very variable and often very exciting, but I'm just interested in how much you conceive that providing young people with certain kinds of digital skills will also give them access to a wider array of skills that perhaps aren't part of your particular project or your particular kind of NGO ambition. So how much, I mean, for example, if you teach girls to make robots, does that also kind of facilitate their access to participate or to learn about health matters? Or so what's the breadth? And then linked to that, and going back to the point I made in my opening to the Digitally Connected conference, how much are you thinking about the way in which giving kids the skills and the access to the wider internet may also bring risks? And do you consider the questions of risks as part of that kind of empowerment practice that you're trying to encourage?
Paulo?
Yeah. In the case of Vojo, for example, it's a tool that's very flexible, so it's possible to do different things. In the project we did in Salvador, in Brazil, we not only taught them to use the technology, the tool, but also we had classes on gender, race relations, and different kinds of things that matter for them. And it was like also a P2P conversation. So we had the kids from different favelas, slums, in other areas come to talk to them about different issues. So my point is, it's not only about technology, but also about interactions, and it is possible to do things in a different way. I just want to come back to the question of sustainability. That is an important thing. We always think about that. That's a big question of how project can be sustainable. And in our case, we are thinking like, for example, people can use Vojo as a way to also make a small business, have more small business opportunities in their context as well, in cities and areas that is marginalized. So I'm going to just come back to this point. But to summarize, it's really possible to use the tool not only for the specific goal of like sending news, for example, in the Vojo, but also have all the discussions with the kids before.
Bruce, did you want to add something?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, my passion is getting as many school children connected as possible in these regions, but their safety is also a key concern. And how do we best use technology to ensure the safety of the children? While there is training on appropriate use of technology, there's also a lot we can do in making sure the network, when they're connecting and on the internet, that they are safe. So just a small example, we use these small little Raspberry Pi computers. We put these into the network and we actually look at, what viruses are hitting that school network, what sites are the students getting by that they shouldn't be, that were set up that they weren't supposed to be looking at, and actually using the technology then to work with the administration of the school to assure that the network that they're connecting to and what they're accessing, that they are safe and they aren't getting to inappropriate material, or that they're not getting inappropriate contact from other places of the world.
That question of what we do online in terms of safety, like we do offline in terms of street-proofing kids, is critical. And it's critical also that it not tip over as a proxy for censorship. So it's taking the best of what the internet has to offer, as well as being well aware of the threats and the harm, the potential harm, but just making sure that that network stays open. We have a question from one of our youth delegates in the front.
Hi. My question is for Sharad. Right? I'm pronouncing it right. I don't know. I've always been a firm believer of internet as a human right and connectivity as a human right. But I encounter a lot of the times people telling me, oh, you know what, we shouldn't worry about connectivity when we have to worry about water and food and health, right? But I believe in transversality when it comes to access to information and connectivity. I was wondering if you could give me a little input on that, right, on how to convince people on the importance of being connected and how it could be a human right as well.
Well, access to information, as I said, is a human right. And when you talk of human rights, it's not that you pick and choose, right? For human rights to be human rights, they have to be all-inclusive. And if access to information is a fundamental right, is a human right, then how you get access is a part of that. Right? So it is not that, oh, we'll do water first, and then we will prevent mortality first, and then people will learn. Well, by the way, there are a whole lot of people who've already survived and who already have water, and they also have rights to access to information. And sometimes the success of your water or other programs would actually depend when people have access to information and know what their rights and entitlements are and can ask for them. And so, yeah, for me, it's a mute thing. Anyone who raises this doesn't actually understand what human rights mean.
Great. Anyone else on the panel want to take that one? No, we've got the mic over here now.
Good morning. Thank you for excellent set of presentations. Sharad means spring, and I think that stands for hope. So I just want to clarify to the earlier speaker. My question is to Sharad and to the other panelists also, but I'll make a very short comment. I think when we said that we can send somebody to the moon and bring that person back, it really means that our capacities are very huge. And something like making sure the world is a safe space for our children and our children learn should not be such a difficult task. So I think, therefore, we may be underestimating the nature of the challenge before us. It may not be simply be technological, that you put a set of gizmos out there. It may be probably deeply political. And I think we need to look at history, and history may tell us some of these answers. But before that, I think some of the terms that we have been using over the last 2 days, we may need to interrogate them a bit to understand where the solutions lie. Access, for example, sometimes I hear the word access being used very uncritically, but access may be a problem because you may be connecting the powerless to other nodes that are powerful, and actually you're just doing cultural imperialism or cultural colonization, transferring the resources from one place to another and assuming that that will work. So access has to always factor in the power asymmetry, and that's very important. People talk about contextual learning, but I think power asymmetry is saying the same thing. Innovation has also been celebrated again and again over the last 2 days. I would like to remind everybody here that the greatest disaster in recent times, the financial scandal, I mean the scam in the US, was completely because of the great innovations that the people did as far as the derivative trading was concerned. Innovations has to be looked from a social lens, not merely that anything different and anything new is going to be good. And many of the innovations that we have seen in technology could really be dangerous. The third thing is, I think, confusing learning with information. Information is a part of learning, but learning is something much, much more complicated. For the young, it requires mediation, it requires interpretation. And I think we have been just saying that if you put the information out there, the learning will happen. And yesterday I was very disturbed by the first presentation where I saw a toddler, swipe an iPad and then keep swiping pages trying to think that, the pages would change. I think technology seduction is very real, and people spoke about restricting access to technology in one of the questions in the end of the day. I think technology seduction is not something that we might be excited about. Addiction and seduction are something that we may need to be very careful about. Now, back to the question. I think history is a good teacher, and history tells us that the developed world, and I believe the distinction is very important and relevant, in the developed world, education has been built simply because there has been an excellent bedrock of public investment, there has been a bedrock of public institutions that have been built, and that is what is working even today. And somehow we are not bringing that factor in. Maybe we are not responsible, governments are, but unless we bring those factors in, the question to ask UNICEF and the question to ask the other speakers is, what is the per capita expenditure per child? If you look at a child in the US and a child in Burundi, adjusted for purchasing power, parity, I don't have a problem with that. We are really cheating our children if we think that for some countries, children can get the resources they need, and for others, we will give them some digital technologies which will replace public investment. So I would like to really ask, what is the role of public investments, public policy, and building public institutions for making sure that education is meaningful for our children? This is a question not only to UNICEF, but to the other speakers in the panel. And within the foundation of this, how do you embed technology? Sorry, thank you.
Let me go and pull back, go to the library and bring like 20 books. Yeah, but I mean, it's important. There are 2 or 3 comments. One is, I really don't believe in history, because history is his story. And whose story are we telling? And plus, if you create a world which actually is based on the history, then you are essentially extending the history and not creating. And for me, that's a problem. I mean, we work in many organizations, we look at, oh, this has been the past trend and this is what the future is. That's not the future, that's extension of the past. I mean, there is a point in time, and I believe that point is now, where we can actually stand and create a future that is not a derivative of the past, but is a future that comes out of what we really want to see happen. Unless we do that, we would always be tied with, oh, we are a poor country, you are a rich country. And many of the countries, Singapore, Japan, Korea, they made investments at a time, and including Iran, when they were at war or soon after war, and they invested in infrastructure, like they said, education is the building block. Now, the world is changing rapidly, and what we are talking is education is the building block, but the focus is how do you get education to people. And yes, public investment is right, but 40% or 50% of the education and health services in Africa are being provided by not-for-profit and public and private sector. And for us to then think that the government has the responsibility for everything is not also really realistic. I mean, we need to see how you change the societal thinking where it doesn't depend on, okay, we are waiting and the Messiah will come and do something or bring about a change, where the society actually changes and society starts demanding of, I mean, just to give you an example of Uganda, there is a program called U-Report, which has 270,000 young people who on a weekly basis, twice a week, actually communicate. Every single parliamentarian in Uganda is on U-Report. And they are now connected to their constituency. And many of them, before they go to the parliament, actually ask their constituency what their opinion is before they speak. And that is the kind of power being connected can bring, where the voices of the few and the voices that could never be amplified could actually then make an influence how budget allocations are done, how investments are made. And there have been many examples where they have done that. The Uganda Communications Commission gets about 2% from every telephone company's earnings, and they reinvest that in providing technology and connectivity to the rural areas. Now, if we can just influence that, we are talking about a sustainable thing. So no one can give a complete answer to what you're saying, but this is just my thoughts on it.
Okay, just a response from Susan as well, and then we'll go to the floor.
So just to add to what Sharad was saying about the case in Uganda, that's prevalent in most countries around the world. Every national regulatory authority in the world is responsible for promoting universal service. So universal service and access funds are a great source of funding for connectivity. But in addition to that, we're trying to convince the universal service funds that they should also be promoting digital inclusion, including accessible ICTs for persons with disabilities, as well as digital literacy training. Thanks.
Great. A question from the floor, and then we're going to go to the Twitter feed with a couple of questions.
Indra Delanarol from University of Witwatersrand. I mean, I greatly appreciate learning about things that are actually being done in Rwanda and Uganda. For those of you on the panel who work in multilateral global agencies, do you think that your efforts are best put into trying to lead innovation or fund innovation on a global basis, as opposed to addressing the system changes needed to allow the poor themselves to innovate? There's lots and lots of evidence that the most impactful innovations that have happened in communications have been driven spontaneously by poor people themselves, whether that's please call me's, and the other obvious evidence comes from the fact of how much people are willing to spend on communications. But there are huge problems in the system. The most obvious one is cost. And if multilateral agencies spent their efforts on the system issues, which are appropriately global, more, and less on the micro projects, do you think we'd have more impact? And to pick up on the universal access funds, I mean, the unfortunate reality, for example, is that research shows that mostly they don't work very well. But those funds are not well applied to address inequality in access. So that's an example where that's a global issue. That's the kind of thing where multilateral agencies could have an impact.
Well, I should always start everything that it's not either or. But that is, again, the case here. See, innovation doesn't happen on its own. It has to address a felt need out there. If it is not addressing a felt need, then I'm really not interested in that, and that felt need could be out of a system or out of something which is broken down. It doesn't have to be broken down. It could be a gap. So the Global Innovation Center that I am leading is a very big name, but it's just me. And essentially, my role is not to create an infrastructure and a building of my own, but actually to go and identify those innovations that are happening out there already and see how we can actually bring a whole series of people and legislation and the powers that be behind it to really take it to scale. So it's not so much investment of money, it's actually bringing the connections, it's the convening, it's the building the connectors between different actors to make that happen. When it comes to influencing large-scale things, as I said, our work with the Uganda Communications Commission is not about here is the money, do something about it, but is actually working with them to see how some of the solutions that are already out there can actually be deployed in a more meaningful manner, a sustainable manner, through the resources that they have.
Thank you. There's two questions for Bruce from Twitter. Does Invenio help in the content development in the networks you build? And also, how do you encourage corporates to invest in reliable internet access to rural areas?
Well, I think the first question on the content's a very difficult one. So as I talked earlier, it's easy for a technologist that, okay, here's the right appropriate hardware that's going to work with the infrastructure that's there from a power internet standpoint. Oh, yes, then we have to train the teachers. And next, well, how are we going to do long-term support? And then the last big elephant in the room is, well, where do we get the local content that we need for the proper situation there? And that's always the challenge. And so, we're drawn more and more in helping the project funders or local people figure out how to get the content that they need for their situation. And I have a real life situation going on right now. We're putting a solar-powered computer lab at a university in the Congo that offers a computer science degree. They've never had any books for that degree program. They were taught just off a blackboard from what the professors taught them, and they had no computers. So they've asked me, well, how can we find a 4-year degree in French for computer science that we can put as content in this brand new computer center you're building for us? And you think that would, with all these massively open online college courses that are on the internet now, you think it'd be easy to find one, but it's not. And so, there's a challenge, so yes, we are out trying to actively find the proper content for those local contexts. I'm sorry, what was the other question?
Money.
Oh, money, yes. Well, that's always the challenge, trying to work with corporate donors and getting proper funding to build networks in these rural regions that are robust and reliable. And so there is no easy answer there other than continuing to beat on their doors and finding corporations that are interested in getting good quality internet in those rural developing regions.
Before going back to another one of our youth delegates on the floor, I just want to ask that same question to you, Paulo, because the going local and really the focus on going to the people who are instrumental to what the technology is going to serve has been a refrain that we've heard quite a bit the past couple of days. How does that, what can you tell us about that and Vojo?
Yeah, no, I also think the corporate sector should really be closer to that kind of innovation. And like, for example, in Vojo, we are also eager to find partners to do that. But we see it's normally, they are kind of shy to really connect with this kind of initiatives. I can talk about Brazil. So the corporate sector is not really involved in providing solutions to these areas that don't have a connectivity or are in the low-income areas. But also want to touch one point that it's basic in this conversation, which is we need also public policies addressing these issues. That's fundamental. In case of Brazil, just last week we passed a new law that's trying to touch this question. It's called Marco Civil, trying to make the internet rights, possible in Brazil. I mean, guarantee these rights. But the point is, the government also has an important role in this, and you have to have really good public policies designed to address this issue. Otherwise, you just like with Vojo, we have a good solution, but it's not, of course, cannot resolve the problem of connectivity itself. So we need public policies.
Susan, before we go to our next question.
Sure. I just wanted to respond to the question that I think was directed to both the UN agencies on the panel. I think that ITU and UNICEF are two very different kinds of UN organizations. And on one issue, the ITU is a much leaner, smaller organization than UNICEF is. So in our case, we actually do try to focus on a lot of the big picture policy areas. In the case of the Universal Access Funds in particular, last year, we did an entire study trying to evaluate what was working and what wasn't working, trying to identify what some of the solutions are that could be fixed. And we have an annual meeting, which we call the Global Symposium for Regulators. We get all the world's telecom regulators together in the same room for 3 or 4 days, and that report was presented to them as a part of a capacity building initiative to help improve those. There are good examples of universal service funds out there. There are great universal service funds in Latin America, in Colombia and Chile and Peru. And so those serve as great examples that we can share with the rest of the world. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Over here.
Hi, my name is Rogelio. I wanted to thank, first of all, the speakers for very relevant and insightful presentations. And I wanted to ask about funding, this topic of funding that keeps coming up and the idea of funding initiatives. And it was mentioned before, funding is very much tied to sustainable projects and making sure that they exist after they're created and the idea of having them scale. At the same time, one of the themes that I picked up from the past few days is the idea that involving stakeholders directly in the creation of those initiatives increases their likelihood to maintain involved. And so I wanted to ask, how is this reconciled when, how can we support community ownership of initiatives or increase the ownership of initiatives by stakeholders at a time when ownership concentration is increasingly moving into fewer hands? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Shrod, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. I think when the ownership is moving into few hands, at the same time there's a big ask of all these companies for public good and corporate social responsibility that's coming. And there are at least 2 ways in which you can address that corporate social responsibility. One, you go and say, give me some money and I'll do something about it, okay? And so you go to a telecom company and say, you know what, I want to run a health center, give me some money. And they'll be happy to give it to you and then take a picture and stuff like that. That, to me, doesn't work very sustainable. But the model that I have worked with and has worked in many cases and is working increasingly in other countries is when you actually ask for their engagement in corporate social responsibility using their core business strength. Where essentially if you go to a telecom and say, listen, this is a public good, and what we would like is give us heavy discounts on, let's say, the SMS packages. So we pay like 10% of what an SMS package would cost. It doesn't cost them much. It gives them the ability to participate, and at the same time, it's no additional work for them. So things like that, but again, it's not one model works for all, but what I'm finding is that increasingly, telecom companies, increasingly internet service providers, increasingly hardware manufacturers, it's a lot easier for them to actually support you if it's a part of their core corporate strength and core corporate business, rather than it is something which really is not a part of their core business and you say, why don't you join us? And they will do it for once or twice, but it doesn't become a part. The other thing that happens is when it's their core business and they get involved, they have realized that they actually can increase their market segment because it's a lot of very good publicity for them engaging in public good. And so increasingly there is a trend. It requires a lot more education, but I think it's turning around.
Regina wants to handle that one as well.
Yes, I totally agree with what Shara said. So some of the initiatives that we do in Ghana is we try and identify the funders and identify like what is their core business. So when we talk to a telco, we'll be like, okay, we want to have this sort of coding session. Give us your internet dongles. We'll be promoting the telco. We'll be using their internet dongles. We'll be promoting the fact that they are trying to bring connectivity in the slums. So it's always about they get good marketing. So it makes sense to them. So immediately they may think, okay, this is a great idea, as opposed to just, bringing something that's not really in their core business. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about was community engagement, because in Ghana, one of the things that happens, which is actually quite funny, is every time it rains, in some places, the floods come, and the people just sort of stand there and go like, the government, the government, the government. So it's like, they never think, okay, how can we fix this problem? What they think is, where's the government? So year in, year out is just strange. Like, they're waiting for the government. And so we need to get people to stop thinking about just relying on the government for everything. Like, you live with the problem. What are you doing about it? It's very important to get communities to start to think, how can I fix this problem in my community? Yeah.
Thank you, Regina. There are a lot of heads nodding in this room because the issue of agency has been one that has come up in several of the sessions that we've had in the last couple of days. I know we're coming close to a close, but there are other questions in the room. Dale, did you have one earlier, or someone else over here? Yep, in the front. Thanks.
Hi. I really appreciate what Susan and Regina have shared with us today about the gender perspective from the ITC. And I am thinking in something. I think that all those problems related with gender is the violence against women. It's a very, very old problem. And I think that it's a problem shaded in many societies and many cultures in the world. And I am really concerned about this problem in Latin America, and especially in Colombia, because the violence against women is increasing in countries like mine. And I am thinking that violence against women is not that hits or attacks or cruel treatments. It's also the non-explicit violence. It's also the message that women are not enough skillful and capable to learn about technologies and empower other women in technologies. So I would really love to listen your impressions about this, and especially I would love that the gentlemen participate.
What did I do?
Like finally, what they think. I am really interested because Regina and Susan are great ambassadors of this cause about gender and ITC, but also I would love to listen gentlemen talking about this.
Thank you. Let's start with Regina on that one.
Okay, so I actually have a very interesting example. When we first started working in the slum, we had the children write out how they thought that they can use technology to solve a problem. And an 11-year-old boy, we have only 2 boys in our class because we don't send children away. He writes, "I don't like it when girls study computers because they are struggling to become computer witches." So, yes, he's only 11. I mean, I was very taken aback because he's too young to be forming those opinions. But that goes to show how disturbed he was to see a room filled with women and we were empowering them. Because when he goes back into the community, they're telling him, girls are not supposed to do this, girls are not supposed to do that. So that is something that I worry about personally, because I worry we're training these girls. What happens when they go back and then they speak louder? Or they are trying to ask for things. I mean, are they going to be hit? Is the community going to take that? So it's tricky, but it's trying to find the balance. And another thing that I want to say now is about the girls that have been abducted by Boko Haram, where it's just sort of like a news article. Today, there's a million march in Abuja, and they are demanding that the government do something. Like, I mean, I'm outraged that there's an article about girls who are missing in Nigeria and Abuja, and it's like, you don't hear anything that's happening. It's a serious thing. So hopefully people talking about it going viral will get, the government to sit up, will get them to do something about, this injustice to girls. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your question. We're going to go to Susan and also Paolo to address it.
Well, Charlie, thank you very much for that question, because I think it raises an important issue as part of our strategy to encourage more girls and women to get into tech careers, that we also need to change the attitudes of boys and men. And in that regard, one of the issues that we think would change mindsets is if we could move to having television shows where we had women characters who were strong characters in ICT careers, because that would, first of all, have the biggest incentive for girls around the world to want to be that person. And I think it would address the kind of issue that you're talking about, which is changing the mindsets of boys and men as well. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say something similar. She's saying that because in case of Brazil, it's exactly what you're saying, in Latin America, the numbers of women and technology is really not well represented. And we need role models. They need more in the media, in the going to the community, all the girls who are doing well. So there are several initiatives that's addressing this issue in Brazil, but not enough, of course. In our case, we have a plus, which is race and gender when they cross. So we have, for example, with the black girls, they are much more they are more likely not to be in this technological area because of all the stereotypes they have, the society put in there. So I think it's a very important and urgent question, in fact, that we should have encourage more girls to go to technological careers and also use technological tools to talk about their problems as well. So, for example, we had some workshops on Vojo with Vojo, with the people who are working, domestic workers, to talk about what the kind of human rights violation they have in Brazil as well, and here.
What's interesting about your question is that it's actually connected to the earlier one about harm, and there's nothing that happens as far as gender goes on any of the on mobile or on internet where it's a case of suspended animation. What's happening offline is happening online, and then sometimes, because of the viral nature of online, it's going to proportions that no one ever expected. That said, where's safety, where's harm, and how do you make sure that you keep the space open in a healthy way so that opinions can be aired and girls and women can be empowered? Really, thank you very much for the question. We've got two up here. Let's bring the mic. Yep. And then over to here. Dale.
I'm Gamelia Jao from Ghana. I'd like to ask Paulo a question, which is that, can you give us an overview of the kind of impact that you've had bringing all these people who are disconnected, bringing their voices out there, and then what kind of challenges have you faced in dealing with city authorities and other authorities, and how have you addressed some of these challenges to actually get the voices of the marginalized and their issues properly addressed? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Yes, so in the case of these projects, we are trying to, as I said, give voice to the voiceless. So many, those communities are not connected, and they have so many things to say, actually. They have a lot to say, and normally the mainstream media doesn't really broadcast their stories, and it's very hard to then to get to the media. So what we accomplish in these projects, and we are trying to move this year to a national project, actually, is trying to connect the people who are in those communities with the traditional journalists as well. So they have the blogosphere in the middle. So they upload the content, and it goes to the blogosphere in all the social media, and also the traditional journalists can get the story and can write and can call them, even though they don't have an email, or the journalists can call them to follow up on the story. So, for instance, just a quick example, this island I showed to you, it's based on an area where they have lots of industries. in the oil companies and ports. It's a very complex area, actually. This community remains from the slavery in Brazil, so it's a very traditional Afro-Brazilian community. And we were doing this project, and there was an environmental accident there. And the media was not covering really well this problem. And then with the Vojo, they start to talk about this problem, and then they got media attention. So that's kind of thing we can use, and actually we don't need like NGOs or politicians. They can speak by themselves. So that's the main point. Of course, the government's not happy, but yeah, anyway.
While the microphone makes its way up to Dale here in the front, I just want to share with people online and in the room, on September 12th, the Committee on the Rights of the Child will be discussing the issue of children and the internet. 25 years ago, when the Convention on the Rights of the Child was ratified or came into existence, this whole specter was not even on the radar. Mobile technology didn't exist. The internet, the way we know it, certainly didn't exist. It's a critical discussion when we think about child rights and the internet and children, youth, digital media, as we've been discussing for the last couple of days. I'll come to you next on that one. Dale.
Yeah, one of the most exciting things about the last 3 days and today is discovering this huge reservoir of young digital entrepreneurs. It's blowing me away. Jam Lab, Bongo Hive, Vojo, all not-for-profit, social business, pure for-profit. There's incredible vitality, incredible energy in this space, but listening to the voices of these incredible people who are here in this room, they face a lot of obstacles. Some of them are mind-blowingly simple, like we just don't have a room. We just don't have a space, and I've been trying to get a physical office space for the last 5 years. Sometimes I think, and then in the first day, someone was talking about the kinds of money that could make a difference, and someone said $500, and someone said $10,000, and these kinds of amounts of money are sort of too small for aid organizations or even venture capitalists to spend time dealing with. So there's some, at the same time that the solutions can be incredibly simple, incredibly small scale. I mean, just listen to the kinds of things Vojo's doing. We need somebody to think about joining up the resources and the funding and whether the private investment, whether public money, whether aid money, because it's sort of asymmetrical. I wonder if any of you guys have any thoughts about that.
I'm sure several do. Susan, please.
That's an excellent question, and I have also been talking with some of the young entrepreneurs that have been with us for the past couple of days. So one of the ideas that Lukongo from Bongo Hive had in mind was he talked about in terms of the office space, and that's why I was trying to talk about the shared office space movement. He said that there are many government offices that are vacant, and so it would be very easy for the governments to be able to make those available to young entrepreneurs. I'm not so sure that I agree with you. I think we do need to have some government support for this as well. But they also talked about the risks of getting too much government involvement. So there have to be very carefully crafted policies so that the government is not killing these entrepreneurial activities. No, but you have a fair point as well. Of course, there are online solutions to this as well as in the crowdfunding that I mentioned. So perhaps one of the solutions to what you're talking about for aid agencies, if it's just too cumbersome for them to handle these small amounts, is to use crowdfunding platforms so that they could actually be delivering these smaller amounts of money that would help things out. There are all sorts of models that could be used as well. Some of the other young entrepreneurs talked about getting funding, and then if they're successful, they pay it back. So there are a lot of models out there.
Regina, what have you learned that you might be able to share on the money front again?
Well, in my case, so I do operate from a co-working space. There's a space in Accra called iSpace, which makes so much sense because you save on costs, you build that community. Funding is always a big challenge, but like I said, it's always those little amounts. You start with something. So instead of waiting to get like 500,000, with just 1,000 Ghana cedis, not even dollars, you can make so much impact in the lives of people. And that's what we're doing. So we're starting small, and we're seeing that it's growing. We recently got some funding from Reach for Change, which is helping us to scale. So the more funding helps us to scale, but you start from somewhere. And that's what I want to say to the young innovators or young people who want to start something. You don't have to wait to get like a huge pot of money. You can start with something small, and you will see the impact that you make with just a little.
Yeah, and in the case of Brazil, it's the same, and with the one more factor that Brazil now is seen as a sixth largest economy in the world. A country that's hosting the World Cup and the Olympic Games. So it's not a country that needs aid anymore. So, which is a huge problem because it still have lots of internal problems, inequalities, and the CSR sector is not really engaging with the community. So I think that's a big challenge we are facing as well. But I guess the idea of crowdfunding is a really good solution, because then the people who believe in the project can also help the project start and then continue. And then thinking we have to innovate, not only in the technology, but innovate how to get the resources. So it's a challenge, but that's what we have for today.
If I can get a mic to the back, right to the back. Thank you.
Thank you. May I just come back to the previous comment and just backing up your comment on the lack of mention of digital rights or in the convention. Obviously, this was a non-existing phenomenon at a time. But this is why I find it so extremely important that, as I mentioned on the first day, on the 12th of September in Geneva, the Committee on the Rights of the Child is organizing a day of general discussion on this topic, especially because the committee members have felt the need for more clarification, much more discussion, including all the stakeholders, obviously including children and young people, but also informing the state parties and all the agencies who are working with children about our standpoint following the consultation. After these general day of discussions, we are always showing a kind of summary of the day of general discussion, and I know that many are waiting even for a general comment from the committee to describe the convention, so to say, translation into the digital era. And I just would like to encourage you to contribute to this discussion and be there for us to help. Thanks.
Thank you. There's a woman who's been incredibly patient, a few here, thanks. And as we give you the microphone, I just want to say to those in the room and those who are following this discussion on Twitter that the panelists have been kind enough to commit to answering questions that have come in. If you don't think that your question has been answered, and I know that there are a few hands that we weren't able to get to here, please send your questions in, and they've committed to helping answer them. You have the last question.
Thank you. My name is Stella, and I'm from Zambia. And this is more a suggestion, and I want to hear what other people feel about it, especially because people have thrown in the space issue and so many constraints that have come in. When I first interacted with Sharad, I hope I got that right, he mentioned how he does his work. He's a one-man team who works with volunteers and has no office space, and he's virtually really streamlined his business model. So do you think, as we are moving on to innovate for children, we should be innovating the way we do business? We don't have to rely on physical space and renting and all these costs that we can really reduce by maybe working from home and interacting with other people. Thank you.
Actually, thank you very much for that question. I was trying to come up with a really good last question to address to all of the panelists. Now I don't have to. So, Susan, do you want to take that on?
I think that in one way it's a good idea and it's a possibility, but when it comes to young entrepreneurs, there are two key things that young entrepreneurs need. They need funding, which we've been talking about during most of this session, but they also need mentoring. And the beauty of having the shared working space is that you create a system of mentors, of peer mentors. So young people can come in to the shared office space. Some people will be going out because they've been there for a while, but the ones that have been there longer can mentor the new ones, and then that can continue in a continuous cycle. So I think we should think carefully about giving up the idea of shared office space because the mentoring is so important to digital entrepreneurs.
Yeah, also agree that we should be careful about that, especially when you talk about social entrepreneurship, because the interaction and the synergy that we need to make things happen normally happens when you have a face-to-face conversation. Of course, we can use a lot of home office and things like that, online conversation, the tools that is available to talk with people in different states. For example, in Brazil, a country that is so big, so sometimes we do a lot that, but of course, it's important also to have a space, and it's struggling, all the rents and all this process, but it's important to have this kind of infrastructure to keep the project.
Especially with social businesses, the challenge that you're trying to solve seems so huge that sometimes you need that sort of face-to-face interaction to talk to your team, to brainstorm, to innovate on ways. And the mentorship is also very important. So it would be great. Unfortunately, bandwidth can be expensive. So if you're going to do Google Hangouts and all that, that is an extra cost. It will even be cheaper to meet face-to-face. So, so those are some of the things. But like co-working spaces make so much sense. I think they are great. And I also think face-to-face. We have a huge volunteer base. And it's just nice to occasionally just meet, to share ideas, to brainstorm. It really helps. Yeah.
Well, our experience in Haiti with the 60 young entrepreneurs that we've trained there in this program that's been going on for 3 years has been quite interesting because they do all have internet connectivity, but they're spread in all the rural regions across the country, and they still have the desire to come together and meet in person to share those experiences. While we mentor them over the internet as much as we can, all of the Invenio employees, they still need that association with each other in person to share what's working for them, what's not working for them, and they achieve that by getting together 4 times a year in one location. And the challenge is, where do they meet, and how can they get those facilities where to meet?
Sharad, we began with you, we ended with you.
Yeah, there are different models. I mean, depending on what you're doing and how you're working. I mean, there are people that need an infrastructure set up because of the kind of work they are in. And iHubs and stuff like that are good ideas and good places where people can exchange ideas, but also importantly, they can support each other, and people who want to use their services don't have to go to 20 different places. So that's great. What you talked about is also, that's how I work mostly, basically. Coffee shops are a good place to bring people to. But again, it depends on if it's just a mentoring thing or if it's a physical infrastructure that you need. My kind of work doesn't require a physical infrastructure. So the people I work with, invite them in private groups at coffee shops, have a cup of coffee and spend 3-4 hours there. Or maybe get a venue from one of the corporate sponsors for half a day for bringing them together. But I mean, as I said, it's difficult to say that this is better and that is better, because it all depends on what you're doing and how you are working.
And then we've been very privileged for the last 3 days to have a venue like this one to share our ideas. I want to thank everyone who's been following us on Twitter and on the live stream, and everyone in the room. This conversation is going to continue through the next few months for those who follow UNICEF Activate. Again, a special thank you to the Berkman Center here at the Harvard Law School, and thanks to all of you.
translated into temporary latrines, but now has become a development solution for the poor. Pit latrines stink. And so if you take Africa, 15 years back, 20 years back, two things happened. We started promoting sanitary latrines, and the mobile phone companies started promoting mobile phones. Today, people are spending more than half of their money, half of their income, in buying phones and paying for the talk time. No one spends a cent on sanitation. My question is why? And we can give many examples or many arguments of why that is so. For me, the fundamental is people invest in cell phones because they immediately give you a return on investment. They add value to it. Why would someone invest in something that we call human waste and that stinks, right? So we need to reframe those assumptions and say there is a better way of doing it. In a country like Uganda, 35% vacancy rate of teachers, 35% absenteeism rate, which means on any given day, 50% of the students who are in the classroom don't see a teacher. Now, the most valuable thing that a poor person has is time. And they are trusting us and putting the most valuable asset that they have is the time of their kids into the classroom where there is no teacher, there are no textbooks, and where even when the teacher is there, they're not necessarily providing quality education. They are essentially teaching and no learning is happening. I really believe that the place you are born and the family, economic status of your family should not be the determinants of what your future should be. And right now, because of the digital divide or other reasons, what is happening is that these two things are becoming the determinants of the future potential of the child. We can always find one or two examples of kids who grew up in a rural area and then became a great scientist. But for the bulk of the kids, that's not the story. And I talked about this. Do the poor really have to make a choice of putting food on the table and being able to learn and acquire skills? If the purpose of education, if you break down all the shenanigans, is twofold. One is citizenship, and second is livelihoods. Then why do people have to choose between the two? Why can't we have a system whereby all these could be available to everyone? And therefore, there is a need to revisit the way we do business. Wherever there is a divide, there can be a bridge. And so people talk about the digital divide. Let's talk about the digital bridge. How do we connect people who don't have access to internet with those who have access to internet, for example? Why do we have systems? I mean, in this day and age, all our accounting and transparency systems are based on historical account. We get annual reports, we have audits, which all say this is what happened in the last 5 years, or this is what happened in the last 1 year. In this day and age of instant communication, why is it that our systems cannot be real time rather than historical account? So that we can actually intervene and prevent that crisis from happening rather than wait 5 years and then get a report by an expert saying, oh, actually you had a crisis 4 years back. And you can do nothing about it because it's already passed. Why do we have to wait for trickle-down effect? That there would be a few elitists who actually get access to something, and then it will trickle down, trickle down, trickle down, so that everyone has to wait. The poorest of the poor and the people living in the remote areas have to actually wait for 15 years, 20 years to actually have the same services that everyone else has. That's not necessary in this day and age. Why is it that we still have training programs for health workers and school teachers once a year or once every 2-3 years, whereas in this day and age of connected technology, and Guru is the one who actually focuses on teachers, we can have a continuous learning happening, right? So why are people not a part of this?
Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to those in the room. Welcome to those joining us on Twitter. And welcome to those of us joining on the live stream that's being sent around the world. Lots of people are already sending questions in for this morning's debate. So let's get the discussion started. Thank you for joining us to this UNICEF Activate talk, committing to coming to you today from Harvard University. This is the third of a special series of talks that UNICEF is doing, and it's the first time that we're doing this kind of talk leading up to what is our flagship publication called State of the World's Children. We are focusing on innovating for children, innovating for equity, and today specifically focusing on innovating to connect the unconnected. Activate talks bring together a remarkable mix of people. Those here in the room, those joining us on Twitter at hashtag UNICEF Activate, those who are also joining us through the hashtag Digitally Connected, and those who are watching the live stream feed. We've got innovators, we've got experts, we've got thought leaders from the public and private sector, and of course, most important of all, we've got children and young people joining the discussion. All of us showcasing the latest innovations that can deliver progress on major issues confronting children, especially the most vulnerable, wherever they may be in the world. This is a unique discussion for UNICEF, and it's unique in two ways. One, it is the first time ever that we've had these kind of public talks to contribute, crowdsourcing really, our State of the World's Children publication. And two, because 2014 marks the 25th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in the world. This anniversary is an important moment for us to pause, to reflect, and to think about how well the world is delivering on its promise to children. So how are we doing? Today, our focus is on how to harness the incredible minds and the technology and the opportunities of our time to get the job done for and with children, especially those who are still being left behind. How do we go from incremental to exponential change when possible? We've been sharing ideas here at Harvard for the last 2 days. We'll get to a panel talking a little bit more about that, bringing some of those strands together. But today we're going to get started with our keynote speaker. I'd like to invite Dr. Sharad Sapra to the front. Dr. Sapra is going to kick us off. He actually kicked off the first of these discussions, which was in Uganda. Last week, we had one in Indonesia. Today, we're here in Boston at Cambridge. And the next talk will be in Beijing a week today. There will be talks in San Francisco, in Armenia, and in other places around the world. Dr. Sapra, Sharad, come on up, is UNICEF's principal advisor on innovation. He's based in Nairobi. He's got more than 30 years experience. That's not meant to embarrass you, it's meant to build you up. He's been our representative in Afghanistan, in Uganda. He started years ago in the area of public health in India. He has tons of experience in innovation as well. Innovation not only as technology, but a way of delivering results for children. And so he's going to be able to look back and bridge to looking forward. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Irina. Morning, everybody, and welcome to the Activate Talks. And let's be activated. Over the last 2 or 3 decades, there has been a lot of progress that has happened in the social sector. We've seen child mortality decline. We've seen more children in school than ever before. We have seen policies and legislations being developed which actually protect children. More people have access to water, and of course, broadband 3G, 2G connectivity is doubling every year, or in some areas, more than doubling. At the same time, we're looking at those 3 billion, the half of the world's population that's living in remote areas, that's living in poverty, that does not have access to all the fancy things that you and I are carrying around our body, that they can have access to that and that they don't fail. So this is what Activate Talks is about. This is why we are all here. And that is to how to find ways and come together and start initiatives that actually provide scalable solutions to the simplest of the world's problems, which are very solvable with digitally connected technology. I'm told I have 5 minutes. Thank you. And there are some questions that I leave behind here for you. The relationship between being connected, innovative potential, and its impact on development. In the US, 25%, I was reading the other day, 25% of the people don't have internet at home. So just being digitally, a 3G or a broadband being available does not necessarily mean that people will have access to it or people will use it. And that's a challenge that we need to figure out different models, business models, on how that can be done. The second question is, should internet access be a fundamental right? My point is that internet access is a subset of access to information. It's one tool. So we need to start looking at how do you provide access to information, and maybe this group could focus on internet access, but not forgetting that it's just one tool. The key critical thing is how do you provide access to information to people. And what are the biggest blockages? And these blockages, everything can be a problem. And for me, every problem is an opportunity for us to do something about it. So if there is a blockage, there is a way that we can open it. So if we can open hard blockages, why the heck can't we open blockages in basic logistics and delivery systems? And so what I would do is leave you all with some of these thoughts, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharad, for getting us started. I think I can fairly say that Sharad is one of UNICEF's unreasonable dreamers, and we're lucky to have him. You've set up a provocative context with some key questions that some of us have actually been discussing for the last couple of days, thanks to Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society and UNICEF that have been co-hosting a symposium called Digitally Connected. This is part of that symposium. Those of you who have been following on hashtag digitally connected and hashtag UNICEF Activate have also been part of that so far. I see that some of you are already sending questions. We'll get to your questions, I promise you. We have a fantastic panel, a global panel of 4 people. And Sharad will come back at the end when we get to our question and answer session. But first, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Bruce Bakey, to get us started on this other part of our discussion. Bruce is Invenio's CEO. He's also the founder of Green Wi-Fi. When we talk about disconnected, we think about technology. But it's not only about technology. And Bruce's team has been involved in picking up where others have failed. He's got great experience and insight from various parts of the world in how and where to start, and when it comes to sustainable computing and engagement with youth, technology, and the technology they work with. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. What I'd like to share with you is a little bit about what Invenio is and what we do. Our mission for the last 8 years has been connecting the unconnected. And our mission has been providing connectivity or internet access in rural communities, providing sustainable computing, but in other terms, solar-powered computing labs in schools, healthcare clinics, and refugee camps. And third, building local capacity that can support those systems in the long term when we've gone back to our
solution. Why is it that they are just recipients? Why is it that they are, who else is more interested in making things happen for them or work for them than the people who benefit from them? Why are they not the center of development of these solutions or participation and just mere recipients? And that's where the role of innovation comes in. We need to move away from what is world to what can be world. It's possible. We all have to become dreamers. The biggest constraints that we have in our imagination is we ourselves. We are our biggest censor boards. Using words like in a real world, or words like in reality, let's be reasonable. You know what? It's time that each one of us is extremely unreasonable. Because being reasonable is not going to deliver what we want to achieve. Okay? In any case, if you add UN in front of reasonable, it becomes unreasonable. So we need to be unreasonable. We need to ask for ourselves, not what I have, but really what I can achieve. And that is when we start stretching those boundaries of what we think is possible, what we think is real. We start stretching those boundaries, we actually innovate. We actually achieve something that's way, way bigger than we all think what we have. I mean, we can send an astronaut to the moon and bring that person back alive. We can't deliver medicines and textbooks to schools. I mean, come on, give me a break. How do we take the big brains and the research of all these prestigious institutions, all these heavily funded labs in the world, all the research centers, and how can we get that to work for those who are living in remote communities, who are living under inequity? It's possible. It can be done. And why can't we take, because I really believe that every problem that we face today, someone has found a solution. We just haven't found that person. And all we need to do is actually find those people, because being illiterate is not being unintelligent. Intelligence and education, I don't see much relationship there. However, every poor person has found a way to deal with the problems or the challenges they are facing. How can we identify those challenges? How can being digitally connected help us identify those solutions, put some science behind it, put some resources behind it, and take it to scale so that it benefits many more who are there? It must be done. It can be done, and it must be done. We're talking about MIT has open university. Anyone can go and look at the curriculum and attend classes and everything. So you've got open universities all over the place, right? But only 17% of the kids in developing countries, that's a lousy word, but that's a word that many people understand. Only 17% go to universities. What happens to the broader base? Why is it that we cannot start with open primary? If there are no teachers, there are millions of retired teachers all over the world. How can we connect them to that school where there is no teacher, where there is no textbook? How can we connect them and make sure that that kid's potential to become someone great is not limited just because there is no teacher in that particular school? Digitally connected can make that happen. We just need to invest some time and energy in these solutions. If we can, call it too big to fail, and we put billions and billions of dollars to bring countries out of economic crisis, you know what? 3 billion people are too big to fail. It is not acceptable that we do not pool resources and our energies to actually make sure at areas which involve long-term engagement and behavior change, not that much progress has happened, or there are serious gaps. Maternal deaths, still a big challenge. These are not things that can be fixed by just delivery of one service, but actually require a change of behavior and require long-term engagement of the people involved. Enrollment has increased. Attendance has also gone up, but that's not necessarily leading to learning in schools. Area of malnutrition, you still find dent. We have lots of solutions for how do you address the issue of once the malnutrition has happened, but not much work has happened on how do you prevent malnutrition, because that again requires major engagement, major participation of the beneficiaries. Education is no longer translating into employment or livelihoods. We promise to the world that if your child goes into school, the child will have a job and would be a very productive citizen. That is not necessarily happening. And most of the budget of health and education services is actually invested in salaries and buildings, and not necessarily in improving the health and education of people. We are also looking at a phenomenon where there are lots of goals and milestones that have been set, but they are at a level where they hide the inequities. So in a country, you might have, the X country has actually achieved the Millennium Development Goals, but you find that as you go within that country, there are huge areas of disparity and inequities. So it's time for us to revisit the assumptions on which our approaches are based. And the reason why I say revisit, because all the strategies that we decided to deliver goods on or deliver results on were based on a certain set of assumptions. And those assumptions, as a result of the success of those strategies, have changed. There used to be no vaccines. Now there is vaccine. There used to be no schools. Now there are schools. Children were not in schools. Now they are in schools. So success brings its own series of challenges, and especially when you are talking about the rights of the child, and especially when you are looking at the inequities, which force us to look at inequities, the rights conversation, you find that those assumptions that work for many do not actually work for all. And so now the challenge is, how do you focus and reduce those inequities, reduce those disparities? And I believe personally that technology can be a big game changer. Technology can be a big leveling, make the field level, and could actually help leapfrog countries that have been lagging behind to actually be right at the front. And I also believe that the higher the inequities, the easier it is for technologies to actually make a difference, because two things happen. One, you don't have to undo decades of assumptions in those areas, and second, they have no other options except this. If you go into an urban area, they have 20 different options of getting access to information. But if you put technology in an area which is very remote, inequitable, you will find suddenly that that becomes the main option. And therefore, in this room, and all the conversation that we are having can actually be a big game changer, especially for areas of inequity. Some of the things, we put some definitions to start with, because some kind of boundaries are necessary. And so we say, we need to provide access to safe water, right? And then we say, the target is within 4 kilometers access to safe water, because you have to define that. Has anyone ever carried 40 liters of water for 4 kilometers? It's not access, it's drudgery. Pit latrines, a solution that was designed for the army to actually have trench latrines, got